Gee, people are out there at the moment dealing with insurance companies. My God, what a nightmare. What a nightmare. And there's all these little stumbles that are happening. People taking for granted they would be looked after when indeed there's these demanding requirements, some of which they weren't aware of. But we're going to get to that in a moment, so we'll all have a bit of an understanding. Now, here's the story, page 9 of Courier Mail today. It's under the heading Policies at a Premium. Insurance costs rise by up to 500% in danger areas. Takes your breath away. Residents in disaster-prone areas are being charged as much as $30,000 more, a 500% increase from the previous year, to renew their home insurance. Leading consumer advocacy group Choice says more homeowners are being priced out of insuring properties. Lynette Shepherd of Launton, she's lived in her home 20 years, said her premium with ANZ increased from $5,900 to $39,186. Choice insurance expert Jody Bird said that over the years he'd seen huge increases from $5,000 to $40,000 or even more. Now, he said that insurers then jacked up the prices in order to exit the market. Now, Ms Shepherd said she was shocked when she saw how much her insurance increased. Shocked would be an understatement. Anyway, she said she tried to shop around but found it difficult as many areas did not offer flood cover. So these are some of the nightmares that are starting to emerge. Imagine going through summer up here without home insurance, which is the reality seemingly facing people who, for whatever reason, can't find cover. And there are reasons around, quite clearly, but we're going to get a better understanding of these matters because Brad Heath at Sure Insurance talks in language we all have access to. Hello, Brad.
Good morning, John.
When you hear figures like that, 500% increase, what can you say about that? I mean, that just takes the breath away. The explanation here is they want to exit the market.
Well, I suppose my reaction is I don't think there's anything sensible anyone can say about that because it's not sensible. If you don't want to be in the market as an insurer, I think you should sort of man up and make that statement. But charging those sort of premiums, I don't think is acceptable. But one of the reasons we got involved in the regional Queensland market some years ago now is this sort of problem, is to try and address those sort of issues, because people in regional Queensland will have seen maybe not prices in recent times that high, but certainly massive increases as well. But we don't think that's acceptable, and we don't think that's a good look for the industry.
Can we just talk about this flood risk business? Now, we've got places like Machin's Beach and Holloway's Beach, the whole story. What's the future for those areas? I've had people saying to me, if you're going to repair a house to its former glory there, aren't you taking a risk of that same thing happening in 5 years, 15 years, 50 years or 100 years? Talk to me about the decisions that must be made by people. Talk to me about the decisions that have in the past been made by governments about reclaiming whole areas because they're too flood prone.
That does occur, of course, and we've seen it in places like Toowoomba and areas outside Toowoomba from the floods earlier in the 2010s. And we see places like the Brisbane City Council buying back houses that are in highly flood-prone areas. So we're talking 1 in 10 years, where it's expected that house will flood every 10 years, every 5 years, every 20 years. Yeah. What we've seen, John, in places like Marchins and Holloways and other areas like that is many of the flooded houses haven't even appeared on the flood maps. So in the sense that the predictions, all the mapping, all of the boffins that have done all the work on that didn't think it would flood, certainly in what we call a reasonable return period. And that's where we get a bit sort of techie now. Some of the flooding and some of the levels of rain, some of the boffins are telling us now in their initial studies were what's been referred to as 1 in 500. Now, what does that really mean in the real world? 1 in 500 says we've stretched out the probabilities of how often we expect a flood of this size. Yes. So 1 in 500 sounds like it's not, it's a very low risk, but it's the exact opposite. What it means is in 100 years you get a certain range of sizes of floods, but in 500 years or 1,000 or whatever, you are going to get some really big floods. They're big one-offs, and that's what a lot of this flooding looks like. Most of it appears not to be again, another techie term called riverine flood, which, as it says, comes from the river. But a lot of it is overland flood, which really what we all know as flash flood.
Oh,
And that's where a lot of this has come from because of the sheer magnitude. Now, some of the rainfall levels really are measured very highly at the moment up in those areas. And it's not necessarily how much rain fell, it's how much rain fell in what period. And some of the rainfall amounts in short periods are really high based on, other records around Queensland. So this will all come out in the studies and what have you. But a lot of what we're seeing up there is really unusual overland flood.
There's that term again, overland flood. Is that the flash flood or is the riverine the flash flood?
No, the overland is the flash flood. So if you think about water just simply flowing from gutters and from down hills and things like that,
yes,
that's what we've seen here in a lot of cases. We have seen some particular streets and suburbs that have had, in places like Cairns, that very unusually flooded and weren't supposed to flood based on their construction standards, the return periods that they were constructed to. We're looking into that. We think there's been some cases of levees failing, and in other cases, levees being built that have created flood problems. So we'll be looking into that, giving feedback to the council and the local authorities on what can be done about that. But our priority at the moment is to get in there and fix up the homes of our customers, particularly those that have been flooded that can't live in them.
That was my next point. We're talking about people with, 6 inches, half a metre of water through their homes. What does their future hold when it comes to insurance?
Look, the process there, John, is simple. The first thing we need to do is find those people alternative accommodation. That was obviously our first port of call, is to get people settled, somewhere to live. That's important. In many cases where people needed it, we've given advance payments on contents losses, so we put money straight into their account so they can go and buy the necessities of life. And often people have walked away with nothing in this situation or very little. Then we need to get our crews in there to fix it up. And the process is relatively straightforward, if I describe it this way. It's a matter of getting in there, stripping out the areas up to or slightly above the levels that have been flooded, drying it out, getting it sanitised and cleaned up, ready for refitting. So that's broadly the process. It's a little bit more complex than that, but that's broadly the process, and that's why it does take a little bit of time to get strip outs done, drying it out, and then getting it resheeted and floor coverings, all that sort of thing. But that's what our teams are focusing on. We call them Category A claims. This is where people can't live in their homes. They're the ones our teams are both in the office and in the field are giving priority to. But we also are dealing with people with special requirements as well, where there might be kids involved or illness involved. And so it's every case on its merits, and it's really a prioritisation approach. That's why we just ask people to be patient, that the teams are working, most cases, 7 days a week at the moment. We're putting as many people on as we can find. We've got people in the field. So look, the team's doing a great job, really proud of them. I would say there would be not one person, even if they're not involved in claims, inside the Shore organisation that hasn't been directly involved in this event.
You referred to the term our teams. Now, these are on standby. I presume you've got some sort of contractual arrangement with them when there's an emergency. But no matter how cleverly you plan, when you get something of these dimensions, how on earth do you find the labour force?
Look, it is a challenge, John, every time, and I've been through a few of them, and that's there's nothing like in these situations a bit of hard-headed experience, and I think avoiding the mistakes. The first part of it is to have lots of loss adjusters and having access to teams of loss adjusters who can get out there into the house, talk to the customers, and start what is really a project rebuild. If you think about the process of fixing flood, it's a little bit like a major renovation of a house. Obviously, it's a bit more traumatic, a lot more dirt and get rubbish involved. But if you think about it like that, and it's the same with our building panels. We've had our building companies that we deal with up and down the state who have relocated their teams up there, and they live there for that period. They move teams of people to those areas, and they work in the town and the areas for months and months to come yet. Same with the allied areas like restorers and people like that have to dry places out. And then the same with our teams in Brisbane. We bring on claims staff. We have computer systems that help with the process of lodging it, and we go and hire additional claims people. We've probably got an additional 20 or so people that have now started work with us, and we use existing staff as well. We take them off their regular jobs and put them on this, and not just in claims, but for example, some of our management team who have worked in claims before in previous lives are on the tools again, and so everyone pitches in, and that's the process that happens. We also have to make sure we deal with our normal claims, the normal claims that still happen day to day in Townsville and Mackay and Bundaberg. So that's everything has to. It's still business as usual, but we have a completely second group of claims now that we deal with, and we have specialists on that who are dealing with that. Well, we've visited the majority of the homes now that needed to be. We've still got several hundred to go, but they're in most cases the lower priority. But we expect to have visited all of the homes that we needed to in the next 7 days and got the process going.
Must be bloody staggering. Surely you're not going to be handing shovels out to those lovely ladies who man your phones.
Oh, no. They and look, there's an example, John. The people that deal with customers wanting to buy policies and help them through the process, we've had them lodging claims. They've been talking to people that have got claims, and it's been a great experience on one hand to sell the policy to someone, and on the other hand to then talk to them when they have a claim. And it's good for the soul for insurance people to know that we're actually doing something good with what we're doing here. Because at the end of the day, that was always the test for sure, was to make sure that we could actually perform at an event. And a lot of people have said that to me, but what are you going to be like when a cyclone happens?
Of course.
Now's our time to shine, and we don't shy away from that. We know that that's what people think. That's what I'd be thinking in their shoes. So that's why it's all hands on deck at the moment. I just need to give a shout out to my wider team here. They have just worked day and night, hours and hours, 7 days a week. They're just doing such a great job, and I am genuinely proud of them. They're doing a great job.
Gee, this is encouraging. Don't go away, though, because there's some secrets here. Some people say, we put the hoses through and we did this, we did that, and everything's looking tickety-boo. Are there longer-term issues that homeowners need to be aware of? For example, water might have got into places that they hadn't even thought of.
Look, for sure, John. For people who, perhaps aren't insured or not insured enough or whatever the situation is,
yes.
The process of drying out behind panelling in cavities and in stud work and that sort of thing is really important. It's got to be dried out. In many cases, it's got to be sanitised, because unfortunately we've had lots of cases of sewage mixed in with it, and generally known as black water. And we can all understand how that might cause longer term problems, and not just the smell, but bacteria and stuff. So the sanitisation, the strip out, the sanitisation, and then the drying, as well as in some cases electricals. Everyone has to think about electricals as well and the safety of that. That's not something any of us want to play with. So it's all of that sort of process that needs to happen to make sure that longer term mould and other things like that don't appear. And that's something our teams focus on very strongly, is making sure that we make sure we don't have a future problem. There's no point stripping it out, refitting it, painting it, and then having to re-strip it out again later. That just doesn't make sense.
Are there people who actually specialise in this so-called process?
There are. There's those that do specialise, and those they say that they specialise. It's the old story in these situations. There's quite a range of quality out there, and that's why we have our teams that we know can back up the promise of what we make to our customers to put them back in the same position. That's what I'd encourage people to do, and in our case, we have full teams of people who are doing the work, and they're the ones that we use exclusively in this situation, but just to make sure we get it done right. It's a simple proposition. It's not about cutting cost as much as it is about getting it done right, and getting it done right the first time, not down the track when there's a problem. As I say, you don't want to be re-stripping walls out to fix a problem that could have been fixed easily at the start. Exactly. So again, it's about getting it done right.
This has been very interesting indeed, Bradley Heath. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Gee, how comprehensive was that?